A formal moral argument sometimes put forward for divine existence runs as follows. Premise 1. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Premise 2. Objective moral values and duties do exist. Conclusion, therefore God exists. According to William Lane Craig, a proponent of this argument, to say there are objective moral values is to say something is good or evil independently of whether anybody believes it to be so. But if moral values are independent of everyone's evaluation, this leaves Craig with significant problems. One is that if two humans perform an action, one thinking it evil, the other having no sense that it's evil, what they believe about their behaviour is not irrelevant to our moral assessment. If someone's genuinely ignorant of what they do, we don't accept their harmful behaviour, and we restrain it if possible, but we don't call it evil. Craig's idea that something is evil, whether or not anyone believes so, clearly doesn't reflect the way we tend to make moral judgments. The idea of evil is only relevant in proportion to an agent's understanding, which is one reason we don't judge other animals by human standards. Craig thinks non-believers who see anything special about human morality have succumbed to the temptation of speciesism. But noting that humans have greater capacity for moral reflection than other species is not, as Craig insists, an unjustifiable bias. It's a relevant difference. In fact, given Craig's own claim that no moral dimension exists for non-human animals, the real speciesist would be Craig's God. After all, what do we make of a being that, according to Craig, has decided that only one species is morally accountable, so that the human child killer is evil, but the lion that kills other lions' cubs does nothing wrong? However, a more basic problem for Craig is that values are the result of the evaluation process. Moral values refer to what we judge morally valuable or important. So to say they apply independently of anyone's evaluation, that some things have unevaluated value, becomes unintelligible. It also lacks any practical application. We may dismiss things right now which, given other information, we'd value, but we can't go beyond the range of our own awareness to see how unknown information would alter our values. So unknown values, even if they existed, would only be relevant from the moment of their discovery, at which point it would be far less metaphysically extravagant to say we'd simply then made an evaluation than say we'd discovered an unevaluated value. It's true that given more complete information, justifications for certain attitudes and behaviour will be exposed as false. It's true that there can be subjective facts. If you burn your finger, the pain you feel won't be merely a matter of opinion, even though it's subjective. It's also true, as John Mackey notes, that given sufficiently specified standards of morality, it will be an objective issue, a matter of truth and falsehood, how well any particular specimen measures up to those standards. Of course, the choice of standards still won't be objective, but nor will it be completely arbitrary, because what we value isn't completely random, but highly influenced by the kind of creature we are. So we can agree with Craig when he says most people think there's an objective difference between torturing a child and caring for it, that these are not morally indifferent acts. However, just because we distinguish torture from caring and find one bad and the other good, that doesn't mean we have to agree with Craig that these behaviours are therefore good or evil independently of what anyone thinks. Some defend objective values by claiming moral value is a property we detect with a special faculty of moral perception. But notice this is no longer supporting divine existence, as the moral argument is claimed to, only proposing new phenomena in need of their own independent support, and each has problems. For example, how can it be shown that if someone says Q is morally good, they've detected a value of goodness that's part of Q itself, rather than simply made a subjective evaluation that it's good? We can't appeal to consensus. Agreement that Q is good still doesn't tell us that the goodness is part of Q, rather than something we're ascribing. And besides, this particular moral argument deems agreement irrelevant. Nor can we appeal to innate tendencies. Even if we can be shown to have an innate predisposition to find Q good, that wouldn't show Q has objective goodness. It would only indicate we're innately predisposed to value Q subjectively. We may value life, but sliding from I value life to life has objective value makes the same mistake as sliding from I find slugs revolting to slugs are intrinsically revolting. It's falsely projecting our own attitude onto the object of our attitude. As Mackey notes, our wants and demands give rise to the notion of objective values by reversing the direction of dependence, so that instead of seeing our evaluation of a thing's goodness depend on our desire for a thing is seen to depend on the thing's goodness. Saying intuition lets us know what's morally good or bad also needs to be challenged. The weaker claim that moral intuition is a kind of instinctive judgment can be granted. It's true that instinctive feelings can lead us to judge actions immoral without conscious reasoning. Empathy, for example, leads us quickly to apprehend the distress of a child being attacked, and a moral judgment may arrive in our awareness almost instantly. Our brains process information rapidly, and it's easy to see how having protective instincts came to give us an advantage while trying to survive together on a hostile planet. But having useful, advantageous instincts isn't evidence that we're accessing objective moral knowledge. We do well to treat our intuitions with more caution. They frequently mislead us. Contrary to appearances, these squares aren't moving, which you can test by pausing the video, but we seem hardwired to make a false interpretation. Much of what we discover about ourselves and the world is counterintuitive. For example, we tend to care and donate more when charities show us cases of single rather than mass suffering. In a fascinating article looking at this identifiable victim effect, Paul Slovich notes how we're generally less affected as the number of victims presented to us increases, and discusses the unsettling implications this has for our moral tendencies. Sometimes what one intuits to be self-evidently morally bad, another intuits to be self-evidently morally neutral. If they each appeal to intuition, this only tells us that they each know they're right. To make a valid case, they need to do more. The subjective experience of believing a thing to be so obvious as to require no explanation is not self-guaranteeing, and this is especially true with morality, where people are prone to mistaking feelings for moral knowledge. While intuition might be a source of useful questions, our brains are too error-prone to regard it as a reliable source of objective answers. Moving to moral duties. When Craig says to say we have objective moral duties is to say we have certain moral obligations regardless of whether we think we do, this is a concept with similar empirical and conceptual problems. If absolutely no one is aware of a duty to do X, the idea of having such a duty gets no purchase. Again, there's no problem saying that given better information, justifications based on false understanding get eliminated, while new justifications will emerge. If the members of society X are generally protective of others, but mistake mental disorder for demon possession, which they see as a threat, they may feel a moral duty consistent with these attitudes, namely a duty to destroy the perceived threat. If they outgrow their belief in possession and learn about brain dysfunction, they may feel a new duty, to care for those with mental disorder. It's not that they discover a hitherto unknown objective duty to help rather than harm these people. It's that given an initially protective attitude, their sense of duty changes in response to changes in information. As before, much of the sense of what we ought to do may come initially from instinct rather than conscious reasoning. Again, empathic instincts influence much of our behaviour, and it's easy to see how this instinct would evolve, how natural selection would favour groups of humans whose instinct was to protect each other over individuals trying to survive on a hostile planet with no one to protect them. But as before, having advantageous instincts that motivate us to behave or stop behaving in a certain way isn't evidence that we have objective duties.